We are going to talk this first hour, with a very unusual gentleman. He is an author. He is also the CEO of Accentus Ludus LLC, the world's foremost training designer for high-stress occupations. He is a military veteran of the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne, about the most famous unit we have in the military, and a federal law enforcement veteran who served with the Federal Air Marshal Program. That's a book in itself, and in fact, if you look on his homepage, click on his name, you'll see a book about that very thing. He has taught at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center and hundreds of law enforcement and military academies. His work has been adopted at the national level in South Africa, Sweden, and Norway. He consults on research with DARPA. Don't hold that against him. NASA, or that either. Naval Research, and other cutting-edge military research institutions. He's an experienced counter-terrorist operator and instructor who has appeared as an expert commentator on Oprah, Dateline, Fox Family and News, Primetime, Good Morning America, and hundreds of other TV and radio stations and programs. Well, Marcus, you finally got to the top. Welcome.
Jeff, I am so happy. I'm a little bit giddy because I do check into your website probably 4 or 5 times a week and have been doing so for, probably 15, maybe 20 years.
Wow.
So I'm very happy and honored to be here. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you. Thank you for coming by and saying that. It's very difficult to know on the internet. It's not like terrestrial radio. Who's listening, who's watching. You get numbers, and numbers can be misleading, but it's nice to know that quality people, and there are a lot of them, do visit the site and appreciate it. And what's really amusing to me is when I receive stories, I rewrite most of the headlines for the stories I do link to, and I'll have someone send me a story back to me. Have you seen this? And it'll be my headline. So, things get around, and that's good. The idea is to spread things around. Now, you get around, my friend. I'll tell you this book, your newest, called Love Lady. Let me just read this, a little bit of a thumbnail for our listeners. Follow Frank Lovelady, a man full of secrets, as he hunts for the missing daughter of a fellow veteran in the darkest corners of the underworld. Marcus Wynne creates a new subworld in the Wynne universe, where you'll find a whole new take on the elements of his best-selling fiction. Dark psychological thrills, gut-wrenching and accurate violence, the shadow side of sex, and confrontation with evil in its rawest forms. And the reviews are already coming in. This is out now, is it, Marcus?
Yeah, Love Lady has been out for a while. The latest book, if you'll see, there's 9 of them, and Love Lady's been out for some time as a ebook. That's in my thriller line.
Uh-huh.
And then the book that's coming out this November is my first foray into urban fantasy, and that's The Depossessionist.
Urban fantasy.
Uh-huh.
That's a unique phrase. What's the derivation of urban fantasy?
Well, it's an interesting thing, being a genre jumper. I kind of made my bones, if you will, in the world of thrillerdom. And the reputation that I got there and the sales that I received and the accolades I was very glad to see were based on kind of the authenticity of, the kind of gritty side of what happens in special operations and counterterrorism, coupled with my very deep interest in the psychological aspects, what makes up a really good special operator. And also, the core of the story, like it is, I think it's the great, proto story we all deal with is, truth versus the lie, dark versus the light, good versus evil. And that comes out in everything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. The idea of truth anymore, that word has been kicked around the block so many times now that I've given it up. I use the word reality as well as one can define it. We've become a nation of cliches, and the semantic wars never end. I just in the last couple of weeks, so I know some of you listening, I don't know if Marcus has had time, but if you watch the Anthony Fauci of the National Institutes of Health and this guy Frieden with the CDC, they lie. They lie, ball, and they're not very good at it, frankly. This Tom Frieden at the CDC, he's got this crap-eating grin on his face all the time, and he's a yuckster, and he lies. They change their story in mid-sentence sometimes, and it's enough to really make it. There's a lot more I don't want to get into Ebola, but there's a lot more going on out there, folks, than you're being told. Let me just leave it at that. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we have a number of cases that have been quashed, shall we say, in the media, as much as they can. This thing is just getting going. Hopefully it won't go very far, but there have been nearly 100 workers now who have come into contact with the late Thomas Duncan and his nurse who is now infected, all told. That's a lot of folks. So we will see. That's another urban issue, isn't it?
It is, and that whole nature that you're talking about, in essence, what we watched played out in the mainstream media and the counterpoint, and there's also the different counterpoints within the alternative media, and then that small section I kind of called the truth sayers, and that's a capital T and a capital S in my mind, are those that, really hew to the archetype of speaking the truth, whether it's, acceptable or not, and accepting the consequences of doing so. You've been one of those for a long time. This whole thing that we've seen played out around the issue of Ebola, it's narrative warfare. That's what it is. Who can control the dominance of the story? If you control the story, you control the perception of the reality, and the vast majority of people will follow that. And, this is something we've seen before in the 20th century, with Goebbels and propaganda and the big lie. And that's one of the things that, for instance, in the Depossessionists I seized on, is that, you have Satan, who is known as the father of lies. And there's like the 3 lies that drive demonic possession or a demonic obsession. And the lies that are told to those beings that inhabit other people are, you're not of the light, you can never return to the light will hurt you. And those are called like the 3 great lies that the father of lie dispels among those that he takes under into his control. And what's really interesting for those of us who, stand with a foot in both worlds, and I count you as one of them, is to see this being played out on like the grand canvas. Because as you said, the guy is just flat out lying, changing his story in the middle of it, and there's millions of people who are nodding, going, yeah. And for me, spending that time with, watching the perception management, kind of tuning into what is the sense of what is going on behind the scenes here. It's an unsettling time.
It is. When is the last time you came across a Class A mainstream media story that dealt with the beyond catastrophic Fukushima Daiichi disaster? Beyond measure. 1,000 metric tons a day of death water has been flowing into the Pacific for going on 4 years now. And there are certainly strong evidences surfacing now, no pun intended, that show there are massive die-offs in the North Pacific, and it's looking like it's going to continue. We'll find out more as time passes, but no one talks about it, so it's out of mind. You ask the average person on the street, and they go, ba, ba, and they just keep their head down and keep eating. They don't want to talk about it. They don't know. It's all taken care of, isn't it? We don't hear about it anymore. It must be gone.
Yeah, and the implications of that, the reality is that there's so much that one has to accept before they get to that truth. One, they have to accept that someone's not telling them the truth, which means they have to examine their entire platform of perception.
Exactly.
I mean, this isn't true? I don't know if I can accept that.
No, it shatters their comfort zone. It shatters their comfort zone, Marcus. They just don't want to leave it. Let's face it. The level of anguish that's being foisted upon and inculcated within this society is unprecedented. And most people in their day-to-day lives have enough. They just don't want to deal with the outside stuff. And so we're passive. We don't take to the streets anymore. It's too much. And the average person gets depressed over time. And then what happens? They get medicated into oblivion.
Yes, that is exactly the truth. I was having a discussion with a friend of mine who's a second-generation Iranian-American, brilliant poet, brilliant journalist. And she pointed out, in Iran, you'll get put to death, or you'll be stoned, or you'll be whipped for demonstrating. But they had tens of thousands of kids show up on the streets to demonstrate to try to get their freedom. This was, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But here in the United States, where you're entitled to, most people, most of the time, just can't be bothered. It's like, well, I'll click like on Facebook. That counts, doesn't it?
No, no, those days are over. And thanks to everything from whatever may or may not be happening to them, from chemtrails and electromagnetic frequencies that are being pushed all over the place, cell phones, GMO foods, God knows how many. I think it's 16,000 chemicals a day we come into contact with if we live the average American lifestyle. So people are being poisoned and toxified to the extent that they really can't interact much anymore. They just can't.
Well, it's interesting because one of the last things that I was on your site research for was I was looking for regimens to reduce fluoride in drinking water and to detoxify the pineal gland from the fluoride crystal buildups there. Right. You have some really good links and resources. And that's another one of the things which goes back to kind of that Nazi Germany link I explore in The Depossessionists, which is, they were the ones that came out with that stuff that says, if you put this in the water, it makes people docile.
Correct.
It fills that up. And then there's the higher level, the higher energetic perception of that. The work that's being done identifying that the pineal gland is in fact a transmitter and receptor of those subtle energies, the electromagnetic, and then it's being affected by all of the cell phones, Wi-Fi, TV, radio transmission, electrical cables.
Well, Wi-Fi may be the worst. Wi-Fi is ultimately a killer. In fact, it's weird. The British have outlawed Wi-Fi in any classroom, and it can't be used around children under the age of 18. Apparently, when they turn 18, it won't hurt them anymore. But it's here. They're talking about Wi-Fiing the planet now. Google wants to deploy how many satellites? I forget, 60 or something, and they want to Wi-Fi the planet. So they're slowly French frying all of us. And it's not funny. It's the truth. And boy, you see people with their cell phone, Marcus, and you've seen it. They hold it in the palm of their hand and they literally slap it upside their head and hold it on their ear, and they're getting blasted. And they are going to end up, a lot of them, with brain tumors. It's just, but they, oh, well, it's the way it is now. Government wouldn't do it unless it was okay, right?
Well, there's some, really extraordinary implications in it. I mean, I look at things, again, from two different perspectives. One thing, have you ever noticed the position that people have when they're looking at their cell phone? They hold it cupped in their hand in this kind of reverence, and their head's tilted over it. And, I'm a lapsed Catholic, and I grew up with that, and I remember the exact same position in terms of receiving the sacrament, I remember sitting back and watching out of this beautiful day that we had here. The leaves are turning, the water's blue, it's a gorgeous day. And here's like 15 to 20 people walking and standing, and they're all bent in the position of reverence over this electronic device in their hands. And they're completely missing all of this. And one of the things that in consultation with other shamanic practitioners, some of the visions that have been shown to some of us show that there's this very strange evolution almost simultaneously of another life form on top of the life forms that inhabit and their shape in this earth.